Welcome back to Obscure Offerings, the series with a dumb name and an inconsistent schedule, just like Scepter's Kinward branch, in which I discuss little known or otherwise unusual locomotives. And today I've got an especially unusual subject for you, the Morrison-Knudsen TE70-4S. And I didn't know these things ever existed until I started researching for the F40 PHL-2 video. For context, let's take a quick look at General Electric's Universal series, otherwise known as U-boats. Launched in 1956, these were a huge range of diesel locomotives intended for the export market, though several variants, such as the U30B, still ran in the US. One of those export models was the U26C, of which 49 examples were built for New Zealand Railways between 1972 and 1977. They were designated as the DX class, and all but two of them are still in service today, albeit with extensive modifications from the original design. The main subject for our story is the U25B. This was their first successful road switcher for the American market after their split from an Alco partnership in 1953, as at least 400 export U-boats had already been sold before the first U25Bs were built. The early U25Bs had a strange-looking high hood layout, but this was quickly superseded by a lower hood following safety concerns over the narrow walking platform up front. There were 12 U25B demonstrators built, not counting the two XP24 prototypes, and 4 of them were later picked up by the Union Pacific Railroad, with the remainder going to the St. Louis to San Francisco or Frisco Railway. Speaking of Frisco, I remember there was an episode of the Well There's Your Problem podcast in which one of the hosts, Justin, mentioned that the Frisco never actually got to San Francisco. Is that true? Between 1959 and 1966, an impressive 478 of these locomotives were built. At the time, the U25Bs were apparently competing against the EMD GP20 and Alco RS27. Somewhat amusingly, and quite appropriately, only 27 RS27s were built compared to 260 GP20s. For reference, the U25B designation refers to the following aspects. The letter U is short for Universal Series, the 25 refers to 2,500 horsepower, and the B refers to the Bobo wheel arrangement. This means two two-axle bogies, with all 4 axles being powered. The U25Bs were powered by GE's soon-to-be highly successful 7FDL-16 prime mover. The locomotives measured 18.3 metres long, 3.2 metres wide, and 4.8 metres tall. They had a continuous tractive effort of 64,000 pounds and a top speed of 70 miles per hour. I won't go into other technical specifications because I think I've been rambling on long enough, and we've still got a lot more to discuss. The Southern Pacific Railroad took delivery of 68 U25Bs around 1963 and 1964. They were originally numbered from 7500 to 7567, but were soon renumbered to the 6700 series, with the 7500 series eventually being taken by a batch of EMD SD45Rs, including the now infamous 7551. The 4 engines to focus on from this point forward are 6717, 6733, 6745, and 6752. These 4 U25Bs continued to work with Southern Pacific until the mid-1970s. By that point the economy was in a pretty poor state, and 6733 was one of many engines that ended up on a so-called deadline, or as we would say in New Zealand, rotten row, in Los Angeles. In 1977, SP decided to send the 4 aforementioned U25Bs off to Morrison-Knudsen in Boise, Idaho for rebuilding. Morrison-Knudsen replaced the old 7FDL-16 engines with the Swiss-made Sulzer 12ASV 25/30, a type of power unit that had been in production since 1969, although it was mainly found in marine or stationary applications. The idea to experiment with a European power plant sort of relates back to Southern Pacific's experience with the Krauss-Maffei ML4000 diesel hydraulics. Go check out High Iron's video on these things if you want to learn more about them. The rebuilt engines first appeared in 1978, now under the TE70-4S designation, whatever that means, and carrying a distinctive red and orange colour scheme reminiscent of the old daylight livery, which led to the engines being nicknamed popsicles. Not many parts from the original locomotives were reused, and the long hood's height was increased by 10 inches and widened by 4 inches to accommodate the Sulzer power units, which had a power output of 2,800 horsepower. Their new numbers were 7030 to 7033, and following their unveiling they got to work hauling freight trains throughout California and Oregon, though throughout their short lives the whole quartet was rarely seen together. Workshop crews didn't like these things because of how different they were from regular EMD and GE locomotives. One of them apparently suffered a traction motor failure on her first run, and as time went on they had issues with their radiator systems, apparently because they were imported and not used to the local operating conditions. General Electric were hesitant to provide spare parts for the TE70-4S, as they didn't like the idea of anyone putting so-called foreign prime movers in their locomotives, though incidentally the Sulzer prime movers themselves were not the biggest problem. Had these things been successful, SP was hoping to have another 50 U25Bs rebuilt. But as it turned out, the TE70-4Ss ran in service for less than 10 years after their rebuild, owing to their constant poor reliability. By 1985, 7030 and her sisters were all retired and stored in Eugene, Oregon. This picture shows the retired TE70-4S locomotives at Klamath Falls, Oregon, taken in December 1987. The locomotive up front was EMD SD40T-2 number 8278, and in a bizarre coincidence, this very same engine would go on to lead the freight train that infamously ran away down Cajon Pass in 1989. If my research is correct, the TE70-4Ss were sold to Seaboard Towing Corporation in Oakland, California, so that the prime movers could be reused in tugboats. Somehow they remained stored in Oakland for many years, not being scrapped until 2007. Probably goes without saying, but it's a shame that none of these things were preserved. While the unusual TE70-4S rebuilds are now long gone, at least one of the original Southern Pacific U25Bs is preserved. Number 3100, formerly 7508, is based at the Southern California Railway Museum in Paris, and out of the 8 U25Bs in preservation, she's the only one in operational condition. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed learning about this strange Morrison-Knudsen TE70-4S. In conclusion, I think this was a fascinating locomotive, and it was quite interesting researching them and trying to work out why these 4 U25Bs were rebuilt. Although they're very obscure machines, they still have an important place in the history of the Southern Pacific Railroad.